Officer, ma'am, put your hands where we can see them. Dr. Marcus Reed blinks, his pulse pounding. He's standing in front of his own house, still in his scrubs, the exhaustion from a brutal 16-hour shift weighing him down. Blue and red lights dance against his skin. His voice is hoarse. What? I just got home. The officer steps closer, hand resting near his holster. Sir, I won't repeat myself. Dr. Reed's hands lifted instinctively, his medical badge still clipped to his chest. His mind races. He's a surgeon, a husband, a father. Yet none of that seems to matter right now. Karen stands a few feet away, arms crossed, her expression carefully calculated. Her voice trembles just enough. I was scared. He was just standing there. The words drip from her lips, designed for maximum effect. Her gaze flickers to Dr. Reed. There's something smug in her eyes, something victorious. He sees it now. She's not frightened. She's in control. The officer nods. We got a call about a suspicious person on the property. Do you have an ID on you, sir? Dr. Reed swallows hard. In my pocket. The officer doesn't move. His voice rises. This is my home. My car is right there. Look, my keys. The second officer tenses. Sir, don't make any sudden moves. Dr. Reed freezes. His chest tightens. His ID is in his scrubs. All it takes is one wrong motion, one misinterpretation, and his hands stay in the air, palms open. Please, just check. The first officer steps forward, expression unreadable. Turn around. Dr. Reed's stomach drops. You don't understand. Click. The safety strap on the holster unsnaps. He knows that sound too well. A curtain shifts across the street. A teenage boy records on his phone. Another neighbor whispers to her husband but doesn't step outside. A woman stands by her mailbox, gripping the edges, eyes darting between Dr. Reed and the officers. Her lips part like she wants to speak, but then she turns away. No one moves, no one interferes. Dr. Reed's throat is dry. The officer exhales sharply. Step back, sir, now. He doesn't. He can't. Karen lets out a shaky breath, pressing a trembling hand to her chest. He was lurking. Her voice quivers just right. I felt threatened. Dr. Reed's mouth falls open. Lurking? I was getting out of my car. The officers don't respond. They don't need to. Her words are already sinking in, wrapping around their decision like vines. The second officer grabs his radio. We have a possible trespassing suspect requesting backup. Dr. Reed's hands tighten into fists. I am not a suspect. No one listens. Cold metal clamps around his wrists. You're making a mistake. His voice cracks, but the officers don't pause. Phones flash. The teenage boy keeps recording. Karen steps back, watching the cuffs tighten. Dr. Reed's exhaustion disappears, replaced by something sharper. Not fear. Rage. Dr. Reed, we need you in OR2. Stat. Marcus barely glances at the clock. Another emergency, another life in his hands. He moves with precision, exhaustion pushed aside. He spent years proving himself. First in medical school, then in residency. Now as one of the top surgeons in the city. Patients trust him. Colleagues respect him. He thought success would shield him from the weight of prejudice, that his white coat and title would speak louder than his skin. But outside the hospital, excuse me, sir, can I see some ID? Security, again. He exhales. I work here. They hesitate. Not the first time, won't be the last. You'll have to work twice as hard. His mother's words echoed through every late-night study session, every rejection, every door that took longer to open. Growing up, Marcus watched opportunities slip past kids in his neighborhood. Watching talent go unnoticed, potential wasted. He refused to be another statistic. Through scholarships, side jobs, and relentless determination, he climbed. But no matter how high he got, there was always someone questioning. How did you get here? As if hard work wasn't enough. As if he wasn't enough. The house was perfect, spacious, safe. A backyard for his daughter to play in, a fresh start, or so he thought. The first week, the states were subtle. Quick glances, polite smiles that didn't quite reach the eyes. By week 2, the questions started. "Oh, are you renting?" By week 3, it was clear. His neighbors weren't curious. They were calculating, judging. And no matter how much he smiled, how friendly he was, the message was the same. You don't belong here. "Wow, it must be nice to afford a place like this." Karen's voice dripped with feigned sweetness, but Marcus heard what she wasn't saying. "Oh, you're a doctor? I assumed you were an athlete or something." Assumptions, always. She watched them constantly, peeking through curtains, appearing whenever his wife and daughter played outside. A casual conversation would turn into an interrogation. "So, what kind of doctor are you again?" Never asking, always testing, waiting for a reason, any reason. The doorman at his hospital never remembers his name. The cashier double-checks his $100 bill. The security guard follows him just a little too closely at a high-end stores. It's subtle, it's exhausting. And he tells himself it doesn't matter. He's built a life beyond their expectations. But one false call, one accusation, will remind him just how fragile that life really is. "Dr. Reed, you have a moment?" Marcus turned, finding Karen standing at the edge of his driveway, arms folded. "I've noticed a lot of cars coming and going from your house lately." He kept his expression neutral. "My friends and colleagues visit sometimes." Karen smiled, tight-lipped. "It's just, people in this neighborhood like to keep things quiet. You understand, right?" The message was clear. Marcus nodded, unwilling to entertain it. But as she walked away, he exhaled slowly. This wasn't curiosity, it was something else. And he had a feeling it wouldn't stop there. A few days later, Marcus was outside when Karen strolled over sipping iced tea. "Saw your friends over last night, quite the crowd." "Yeah, just some colleagues from the hospital." She raised an eyebrow. "Oh? I wouldn't have guessed. They don't really look like doctors." Marcus felt his jaw tighten. "And what do doctors look like?" Karen chuckled. "Oh, don't take it the wrong way. It's just, I expected suits, briefcases, not, well, never mind." He held back his frustration. He'd heard it before, the unspoken assumption, the coded language. "Well, they are doctors, just like me." She smiled, but her eyes said something else. Laughter filled the backyard. Marcus watched his daughter, Maya, chase balloons, her giggles the highlight of his day. Then the police car pulled up. An officer stepped out. "We got a noise complaint." Marcus frowned. "A noise complaint?" "It's a kids' party." Karen appeared at her fence, phone in hand. "Oh dear, was that me? I just assumed. With all the music, some people might feel disturbed." The music was low. The kids weren't rowdy. The officer looked around. "Everything seems fine here." Karen shrugged. "Just being cautious." Marcus forced a smile. He knew better. Karen's voice had that familiar sugary tone. "So, Marcus, I have to ask, how did you afford this place?" He sighed. "I'm a surgeon." "Oh, wow. I thought maybe you were an athlete. Or, something entrepreneurial." He stared at her. "You mean like a drug dealer?" She gasped. "Oh, goodness, no. I just meant, well, you don't see many people like you in this neighborhood." Marcus clenched his jaw. Not a compliment. Never a compliment. That night, Ava sat beside him on the couch, arms crossed. "You see what she's doing, right?" Marcus rubbed his temples. "She's just ignorant. I'm not letting it get to me." Ava shook her head. "It's not ignorance, Marcus. It's a warning." He didn't want to believe it. But deep down, he did. 2 officers stood at his door. "Dr. Reed, we need to talk." His stomach tightened. "What's this about?" The taller officer glanced at his notepad. "A neighbor reported suspicious activity. Says you've been acting aggressive." Marcus exhaled, jaw tightening. "Karen." This wasn't just casual complaints anymore. She was setting him up. 911, what's your emergency?" There's a suspicious man in our neighborhood. Karen's voice trembled, artificial concern lacing her words. He's loitering near a car. I think he might be breaking in. The dispatcher's voice remained calm. Can you describe him? Tall, black, wearing dark clothes. He keeps looking around like he's checking if someone's watching. I don't feel safe. Karen peered through her blinds as Marcus stepped out of his car, rubbing his tired eyes after a grueling hospital shift. Stay inside, ma'am. Officers are on the way. A satisfied smirk played on Karen's lips. Within moments, the distant wail of sirens shattered the silence. Marcus barely had time to process the flashing red and blue lights before a voice boomed through a speaker. Step away from the vehicle. Hands where we can see them. Confusion clouded his mind. His heart pounded. What the hell is going on? Doors swung open. Officers emerged, weapons drawn. Sir, do not move. This is a misunderstanding. Marcus tried to explain, his voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through him. I live here. My house is right there. The nearest officer advanced, his posture rigid. Put your hands on your head, now. Marcus obeyed. Years of medical training had taught him to stay calm under pressure. But this was different. Neighbors peeked through their curtains. Karen stood on her porch, hands clasped over her mouth in mock horror. Oh my God, is he dangerous? She whispered just loud enough for those around to hear. A few people murmured, uncertain. Others simply watched. Marcus exhaled slowly, knowing this was about to get worse. Face the car, an officer barked, moving closer. Marcus swallowed his frustration. He had no choice. Officer, please. I just got home from work. I'm a doctor. No response. The cold metal of handcuffs clamped around his wrists. We got a report of suspicious activity, one officer muttered. Suspicious? Parking my own car? His exhaustion seeped into his voice. This is a mistake. My ID is in my pocket. Just check. The officers exchanged glances, but none moved. Behind them, Karen gasped dramatically. I was so scared. He was acting so strange. Marcus clenched his jaw. He knew this script too well. A small face appeared at the window. Daddy? Maya's voice was barely a whisper, but he heard it. Stay inside, baby, he called, desperation creeping in. Her tiny hands pressed against the glass. The officer yanked his arms, forcing him to the ground. Please, she's watching, Marcus pleaded, but it didn't matter. Karen's voice chimed in again. Oh no, his poor child. I hope this doesn't traumatize her. Marcus gritted his teeth. It already has. Some watched, uneasy. Others turned away. Mr. Patel shook his head but said nothing. Mrs. Green whispered to her husband, but neither moved. No one stepped forward. No one asked if he was okay. No one told the officers they had the wrong man. And Karen, she just watched. From the sidewalk, a young teenager lifted his phone. The lens captured everything. Marcus on the ground, Karen's fake tears, the officer's aggression. Keep recording, his friend whispered. Karen's voice wavered. I just wanted to be safe. But her act was crumbling, and the world was about to see it. By morning, the footage had spread. Respected surgeon wrongfully arrested, headlines read. The hospital director called. Dr. Reed, we need to discuss this situation. Marcus gripped the phone. Situation? I was humiliated in my own driveway. A heavy sigh. We just need to assess the optics. You understand? Optics. Not the truth, not justice. Karen's voice played in his head. They don't really look like doctors. And now the world had seen what she meant. Marcus hung up. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. Have you seen this? Screens lit up across the country. The footage was everywhere. News broadcasts, social media, headlines screaming, Doctor wrongfully arrested in own driveway. Anger boiled over in comment sections. He did nothing wrong. This is racism, plain and simple. Reporters swarmed Dr. Reed's neighborhood. His hospital released a vague statement. We take these matters seriously. But the damage had been done. Meanwhile, Karen sat in her living room, scrolling furiously through the backlash. Her carefully crafted image of the concerned citizen was crumbling. "This is ridiculous," she hissed, heart pounding. But the world wasn't listening to her excuses anymore. "Dr. Reed, my name is Malik Henderson." The voice on the other end was steady, authoritative. "I've seen the footage. I want to represent you." Marcus hesitated. I don't know if I can fight this." Malik's response was firm. "You don't have to, I will." Within hours, the civil rights attorney held a press conference. "This is not just about one man. This is about a system that allows false accusations to destroy lives." The crowd erupted in agreement. Karen watched from home, her fingers gripping her phone. Things were spiraling fast. Karen Jennings? Oh, this isn't her first time. A former neighbor spoke into the reporter's mic, shaking his head. "She called the cops on my son last year, said he looked suspicious while jogging." Another resident stepped forward. "She reported my husband for lurking outside. He was getting the mail." Social media exploded. Karen has a history of false accusations. News outlets dug deeper. Complaints, police reports, a clear pattern. Dr. Reed sat in silence, shaking his head. "She's been doing this for years," Malik muttered, "and this time she's not getting away with it." The police chief's voice was tight. "We are conducting an internal review," but the public wasn't buying it. Why did they arrest an innocent man so quickly? Why didn't they question Karen's story? Protests erupted. The mayor demanded accountability, and for the first time, the officers involved were under investigation. The press conference was brief, but the message was clear. All charges against Dr. Reed have been dropped. The district attorney adjusted his mic. Furthermore, Karen Jennings will face charges for filing a false police report. Gasps rippled through the crowd. For once, the system wasn't protecting her. Karen felt the ground shift beneath her feet. "This isn't fair." Karen's voice cracked as reporters bombarded her with questions. She had always been the victim, the concerned citizen, but now, she was the villain. Her phone rang, her job, her reputation, everything was slipping away. And the fear in her eyes? It was real this time. "We're going to court," Malik said. Marcus exhaled slowly. "I never wanted this. Neither did the people she hurt." News anchors announced the trial date. Headlines swirled. Karen Jennings faces justice. And as the nation watched, one truth became clear. This fight was far from over. The judge's voice was steady. "Will the defendant please rise?" Karen stood, hands shaking, eyes darting around the packed courtroom. The jury foreperson cleared her throat. "We, the jury, find the defendant guilty." A collective exhale rippled through the room. Karen's breath hitched. No, this can't be happening." Dr. Reed closed his eyes, his wife gripping his hand. Justice, at last. The judge's gavel struck. "Karen Jennings, you have been found guilty of filing a false police report, defamation, and obstruction of justice." Murmurs spread. The weight of her actions was no longer a social media debate. It was law. Karen stumbled back into her seat, stunned. The privilege she had weaponized had turned against her, and for the first time, she had no control. Tears spilled down Karen's cheeks as she turned to the judge. "Your Honor, I never meant to hurt anyone." No one flinched. She sniffled, voice cracking. "I was scared. I thought—" Malik scoffed. "You thought a false accusation would be harmless?" Karen's gaze darted to the jury, then to the reporters scribbling down her every word. "Please, I have a family. I'm not a bad person." The judge's expression didn't change. "Intentions don't erase consequences, Miss Jennings. You didn't cry when Dr. Reed was handcuffed. Save your tears." Karen's sobs echoed in the silent courtroom. No one cared. Dr. Reed stood, voice calm but firm. "Every black person in America knows this story." The jury watched him intently. "We're guilty before we speak, dangerous before we move, a threat before we even breathe." Malik nodded. The weight of the truth hung in the air. I had a career, a life, a family, and in seconds it was taken because one woman decided my existence made her uncomfortable. Karen shifted uncomfortably, avoiding his gaze. You ruined lives with a single lie, Miss Jennings, and the worst part? If not for that video, you would have gotten away with it. Silence, then applause. The crowd erupted, not in chaos, but in recognition. For the first time, the world was listening. Dr. Reed returned to the hospital not as an outcast, but as a symbol of resilience. The hospital board issued a formal apology. We deeply regret our failure to stand by, Dr. Reed co-workers approached him, some with guilt in their eyes. We should have spoken up. His reinstatement wasn't just a professional victory, it was a shift in power. Support poured in. People rallied behind him. Donations flooded organizations fighting false accusations. For once, a black man wasn't just another headline. He was a survivor. And Karen. She was just another cautionary tale. Karen's job severed ties. Her landlord sent an eviction notice. Friends who once laughed at her complaints about those people stopped answering her calls. Social media branded her a racist. Employers blacklisted her. As she packed her things into boxes, one brutal truth settled in. Her privilege had expired. Dr. Reed sat at the dinner table, his children chattering, his wife smiling again. We made it, she whispered. He exhaled, barely. But they did. The nightmare didn't define them. The injustice didn't break them. They were stronger. And as they laughed, love fulfilling the space, they knew. This was home again. The camera crews left. The hashtags faded. But racism, it never vanished. Dr. Reed turned on the news. Another case, another name, another injustice. He closed his eyes. The fight wasn't over. Because in America, justice wasn't guaranteed. It was demanded. And silence was never an option. Discrimination isn't just a story. It's reality for so many. Have you or someone you know faced injustice? Your voice matters. Share your experiences in the comments. Let's stand together, amplify these truths, and ensure they're never ignored again. This fight doesn't end here. Like, subscribe, and share. Because the more we speak out, the louder we become. Stories like Dr. Reed's need to be heard. Will you stand for justice? Racial injustice thrives in silence. Let's keep this conversation alive. Drop a comment, engage with others, and never stop shining a light on these stories. Together, we can make an impact.